Well, good day and welcome to today's Cityforum podcast. I'm Professor Paul Cornish, the Chief Strategist at Cityforum Public Policy Analysis based in the UK. And I'd like to welcome Congressman Jim Langevin on behalf of Cityforum. We are delighted to welcome such a senior parliamentarian and lawmaker, one with such knowledge and experience of really many of the challenges that confront both the US and the UK governments. You're shortly to leave Congress after a really impressive, if I may say stellar career in which you've accumulated a vast amount of experience in all sorts of areas. Currently, you're a member of the House Armed Services Committee, Chairman of the Intelligence and Emerging Threats and Capabilities Subcommittee, Chairman of the House Committee on Homeland Security, and you're also a member of the HASC subcommittees on Sea Power and Projection Forces and Strategic Forces. Recently, you were co-founder of the Congressional Cyber Security Caucus and co-chair of the CSIS Commission on Cybersecurity for the Obama presidency. Other policy and legislative interests are your interest in national infrastructure protection against cyber threats. You've been co-chair of the Bipartisan Congressional Career and Technical Education Caucus, been more than interested, in improving assistance to families with elderly and disabled care needs. And you've been a prominent advocate for Americans with Disabilities Act. So we have plenty to discuss, but I wonder whether we can begin with nothing less than the state of the world as you see it, international security, in other words. What are the most significant current threats as you see it to the US and the West? And I guess the first question, are we doing enough of the right things with Ukraine? Are all Western allies sufficiently involved, would you say?
Paul, it's great to be with you. Thank you for the kind words and the introduction. And I'm looking forward to an energetic, robust discussion. So clearly, there are many threats that we face around the world right now. And yes, you're right to focus on Ukraine, being one of the most significant international challenges that we face right now. And I'm sure we'll expand upon these things. But I think all eyes in the national security space are right now focused on Russia's invasion of Ukraine. And of course, then also the looming threat from China. I think it's important to keep in mind that both China and Russia are not only nation-state adversaries that are a threat to the United States and the West, but there's other global actors such as North Korea and Iran need our attention. They present serious threats, I believe, and because their development of weapons and their erratic behaviors, their intent on upending the international order, as do non-state cyber criminal groups that have perpetrated high-profile cyber attacks against, for example, U.S. critical infrastructure. And so there are a myriad of threats that we face, always a challenge, and yet, we are stronger together. To your point, if you want to focus first on Ukraine, I've been very pleased with the international response pushing back against Russia for this unjust, unlawful invasion of Ukraine. And then, of course, there's been this strong international response pushing back. We've been cohesive. It has been really inspiring in so many ways. And, of course, I'd be remiss in not mentioning the inspiring the response of the Ukrainian people and their willingness to fight for their independence, fight for their country. How inspiring that has been. And so clearly Vladimir Putin grossly miscalculated the response of the West. He thought he'd be facing a quick invasion over in 2 or 3 weeks, and that there would be a fractured NATO, fractured Western response, muted response, and it has been anything but. So again, great challenges, but we've held together. I think everyone is doing their part. And President Biden really does deserve enormous credit for uniting the international community behind the Ukrainian cause. Again, together with our allies, we have imposed crushing sanctions on Russia's economy and bankrupt Putin's war machine. And while the practice of imposing sanctions felt and still feels times it's slow to make the impact that we want to see, I think we're seeing the impacts on Russia's economy much more deeply now than we were 9 months ago.
If we're thinking about bringing this conflict to an end, is there a point at which we should begin negotiation with Russia?
I don't have an easy answer either. It is a complex question. First of all, you have to have a willing negotiating partner on the other side to want to bring this conflict to an end. And Vladimir Putin has made it clear that, he's in this for the long haul and is not right now ready to negotiate. Clearly, not enough pain has been inflicted on Russia yet in terms of the sanctions or bankrupting their economy or their war machine because of this unjust war. And until Vladimir Putin sees it in his best interest to call it a day or reach some kind of negotiated resolution, he's not going to stop. And on the other side of it, the Ukrainian people clearly are emboldened because of their inspiring cohesive response, pushing back against Russia. And I think as long as the West and NATO keep backing Zelensky and the Ukrainian people and their military response, that they will continue to fight, and they want their homeland intact. They want Russia out of Ukraine, and they want to reestablish their borders. And right now, I think that needs to be the end game, the end goal. That ultimately, it's going to be about what the Ukrainian people want and what they would accept as negotiated terms. I don't think that the United States or the West should be imposing a resolution on the Ukrainian people. They really need to come to that conclusion on their own. And I believe it is our obligation as a international community that values democracy and the rule of law and the international order that we should continue to back them. There is broad bipartisan support for continuing to back the Ukrainian response and effort there with both humanitarian, economic, and military aid. And I think that needs to continue to send the message to Vladimir Putin and any other dictator or person who would take aggressive action, try to take land by force, for example, that's not acceptable, and that the international community will have a cohesive, united response pushing back against it.
I've always seen war as, in a way, a battle for initiative, and it struck me from the beginning that even if Ukraine didn't have the means to win a conventional war against Russia, and even if they don't have the capacity to win the initiative, to show that they're the dominant military force, in a way, the best way for them to retain the initiative is by refusing to lose. And I wonder whether you'd agree with that. Where do you think the initiative lies at the moment, with Russia or with Ukraine?
Yeah, I would agree with that. It's their initiative, their the willingness not to lose, to continue to fight for their homelands. When they show that, we are giving them the means to continue that fight and to secure their own borders and their own independence. Again, it's been inspiring for the world to see, and it should be a message to any other dictator or country that would try to move against a peace-loving country for no valid reason, that there's consequences and that there will be an international response to push back against this. So, yeah, I think that right now, as long as the Ukrainian people are willing to fight for their independence in their homeland, that they have the upper hand in the long run. The short run, this is a painful war, significant losses on both sides, but I think it's a war that they can win. It's in many ways just a war of attrition, and they've got to be willing to fight back against Putin and his aggressive actions.
There was a report published recently by the German Marshall Fund on what has been called the Marshall Fund for Ukraine. The image of the Marshall Plan for Europe after the Second World War being taken out and dusted off, with proposals for a massive reconstruction effort funded by Ukraine's allies. And I wonder whether this is the right approach to the post-war reconstruction of Ukraine, because what worries me particularly is that we might be doing Putin a favor by showing that this is the West moving in, gathering Ukraine to its breast, as it were, re-equipping it, re-fortifying it, putting it back on track, and all those good efforts and activities, proving to Putin and proving for his information people that this is the West doing what I always told you they would do, encircling Russia yet again and taking into their sphere of influence, the Western sphere of influence, a major part of what was Russia. Especially if you add to that, I find slightly disturbing tendency in the West to talk about this becoming a Cold War 2.0 or whatever. I wonder whether we're sending the right sort of messages. I have to say, I'm all for reconstructing Ukraine, but I just don't know whether perhaps the rhetoric that we're developing around that objective is quite as subtle as it needs to be. Then there are all sorts of other questions. If we're going to do this for Ukraine, with Ukraine, where does the money come from? How do we get hold of the billions? What is it, 40 billion US or 40 to 60 billion, I've seen estimates. How do we get hold of that money? Where does it come from? Who will lead the effort? Will it be a new General Marshall type figure, or will it be a committee of some sort?
A very valid question to be considering. I don't know if we can say quite yet what the right approach for Ukraine's post-war reconstruction is. I think we've seen the horrifying photos and videos out of that nation, the destruction that has been inflicted on Ukraine, and I think we all recognize the level of destruction Vladimir Putin and his war machine have unleashed on Ukraine. It's absolutely catastrophic and heartbreaking. I will say I'm hopeful that the day will come soon, and allies and partners must work alongside Ukraine to select the appropriate course of action. Perhaps an approach like the Marshall Fund will be the best way to rebuild, but I'm very open to these conversations and to the development of ideas with allies and partners. When this war is over, we must be prepared, though, to help Ukraine move forward. Maybe the Marshall Plan is the best template that we have, but I think it's going to have to be a comprehensive discussion about what will be the best move forward, and how to pay for it, of course, is a big question.
Yeah, I think I agree with you. It is early days yet. Let's hope it all comes to a conclusion within months. But I agree with you. Clearly, we need to be thinking about it. Maybe we can get quite a lot of the money from the oligarchs and from their confiscated boats and whatever else they've got.
As they say, all options should be on the table, as they say.
I agree. Yeah. Can we come on then to China? Here's another easy question for you. What to do about China with Taiwan in mind? Question at the top of everybody's mind is there going to be an armed conflict? What do you think?
We all hope that it doesn't come to that, but it's difficult to speculate if and when exactly China moves toward armed conflict with Taiwan. I will say clearly that there's no doubt that Xi Jinping and Chinese government are watching what's happening in Ukraine and how the West is responding. I would venture to guess that the cohesive international response to Russia's invasion of Ukraine has given pause to Xi Jinping, at least for a time, about when or if they're going to move militarily against Taiwan. They have to recognize that now there's a high probability that there will be a strong international response condemning China for such action. But I don't think it's dispositive to say that it would stop China from moving militarily against Taiwan. Time will tell. In recent months, this is what we do know, that the Chinese Communist Party conducted a series of military exercises off the coast of Taiwan in what experts described as the CCP's most aggressive show of force to date. China is currently scaling up its military capabilities. They are also cultivating economic power and political influence across the developing world, particularly in Southeast Asia. The Chinese Communist Party has also demonstrated its ability to wield its cyber capabilities in support of its widespread, persistent, and aggressive intelligence enterprise. So this clearly has enabled the theft of trillions of dollars of Western technology, trade secrets, intellectual property, along with the personally identifiable information of hundreds of millions of individuals. So clearly, China sees Taiwan as theirs, as part of China, and does not recognize its independence. And China sees that form of government and the status quo as a threat to its superiority and its one China policy.
As things, I'm not saying hot up, but as they get a little bit more tense, and as there's perhaps a bit more by way of a military standoff developing, I think that's probably fair to say without suggesting that we're all rushing to conflict. What do you see, though, UK making a significant contribution? I mean, we're there, we're part of the Australia, UK, US agreement and so on, but does the United States see the UK as an important military strategic partner in the region?
I think all of our allies are viewed, especially as strategic partners in the region. I would hope that that's the case. Again, stronger together. That's what I believe. Prefer that approach. Clearly, going it alone would always be more challenging, and we're stronger together. So I hope we can continue to cultivate those partnerships, both military and economic.
Is our best approach to China in the economic and diplomatic realm, or do we actually see that what we're coming to call increasingly the decoupling by the West from our engagement with China, not just engagement, but perhaps even dependency upon China? Do you see that as the way forward?
I don't think there should be a decoupling. I think that we have to have a balanced approach. Again, We talked about China scaling up its military capabilities. They're also cultivating economic and political influence across the developing world, as I mentioned. And as for decoupling, I think that the conversation there has evolved past should we do it. We've seen both the Trump and Biden administrations take actions to protect our national security interests by imposing sanctions or restrictions on Chinese technology. To me, the question really is, how far should we go? I don't think a world in which the U.S. completely severs its economic or technological relationship with China is realistic or desirable. The challenge for policymakers in this space, I think, is to find the right balance between the protection of U.S. national security and also the preservation of a relationship with China, which is healthy enough to allow the two nations to cooperate on global challenges such as climate change and public health and more. But having a healthy respect for the fact that we have two of the world's most powerful militaries. We need to make sure that we keep open lines of communication, avoid miscalculation close wherever possible, but recognize that there's a growing competition. We hope that China will be more in the realm of a global competitor rather than an enemy. That would be a best end goal that we could hope for.
Yeah, I think that's a very useful perspective, actually. Competition rather than conflict or tension or rivalry or whatever else. There's nothing wrong with competition. And let's not forget, I think we'd all agree that China, I don't believe, on the basis of my visits there for various professional matters, I don't think that Chinese see themselves disengaging from the world either. I think they see themselves very much as part of a world. They simply argue that the world needs to be a bit more friendly, conducive to their interests, I suppose. Can we come then? You've touched on many of these already, or several of them, as well as the territorial matters that we discussed, in this case Russia and then Ukraine, but you also touched on Iran and North Korea. My final question under this international security bracket concerns the emergent threats and challenges to the US and to the West more broadly. And I know this is something that's taken up, I guess, quite a certain amount of your time in Congress. And I wonder if you can say anything more about these, about the economic challenges, the ideological challenge to the West, or Western ideas more likely, technological challenges through high technology material that we're going to come to later in our conversation. Do you have any further thoughts about that? I mean, the reason I'm asking this is because you can often get the impression that the world is in a state of chaos, and you wake up every morning and some new challenge has come along from some quarter that we didn't anticipate until it arrived. What's your rough view? I mean, let's just put the territorial to one side. Is this a world of tech chaos or ideological chaos or whatever?
I was elected to Congress 22 years ago, less than a year before the devastating attacks on September 11th from Al Qaeda to ISIS, and then, of course, now dealing with the challenges of Iran, North Korea, now the ascendant China and aggressive Russia. Our nation has been confronted by a complex and dynamic set of threats during my time in office, and while we've made progress addressing some of these challenges, others will endure for years to come, and these are not easy problems to solve. And the threat landscape before us, I think, will only become more and more complex. While no two threats are the same, I'd say that the ideological targeting of free and open societies cannot be ignored or underestimated. That's where it becomes very corrosive, and divisions are being, I think, exploited and make the divide even worse when you're throwing gasoline on the fire, as it were. As I said, Russia's unprovoked invasion of Ukraine, of course, provides a deep, concerning case study of modern warfare as the Ukrainian people fight to defend their democratic homeland. The same concern is present to China's threatening posture toward Taiwan. But when discussing emergent threats, it's also important to address the fact that threats are no longer just happening in conventional domains, and the global community must be prepared for this. And we need to look towards things like cyberspace, where men and women in uniform are confronting threats nearly every day. So, um, yeah, especially in the information age, information warfare that we're engaged in. That's something else that is one of the things that worries me quite a bit. Using the platforms of social media, for example, to further divide and exacerbate differences and challenges. So something that we need to be mindful of.
Can we then move on to one area of technology in which I know that you've taken a very great interest for many years, which is, of course, cyber security? Without getting into the endless disputes about which terminology we should use, what does cybersecurity mean and what does cyberspace mean? Let's just assume we know what we're talking about. The invention of cyberspace, 60 years ago or so, I would say enabled unprecedented and in many respects unanticipated possibilities for worldwide, almost instant and mass transfer of data, information, images, art, ideas, you name it. But here we are, 2 decades into the 21st century. I'd say that enough is known about this new information environment to suggest that all of its acknowledged effects, together with its wider potential, as someone once said, what we don't know that we don't know, as they say, that all of these are probably best described as revolutionary. And I use that term very cautiously, but I'm thinking economically, technologically, politically, artistically, industrially, commercially, societally, you name it, and of course strategically. Little, if anything, about the human existence seems to have been left untouched in this revolution. So here's my first question, and apologies, this is a bit abstract, but I think it's an interesting one. If this is a revolution, and it's not just my term for it, a lot of people think about and talk about the information or the digital revolution. If it's a revolution, then who or what is in control of this thing? Where and how and when does it come to an end?
The information environment has revolutionized our society in almost innumerable ways. Think about it, significantly changed our way of life, our culture. I don't think one could really say that there's a single individual organization that is in total control of the development of the information environment. Though there are certainly such entities with the means to exert great influence over the way that the internet works. And, one of the things that I get concerned about is, because the social media companies and the way people get their news now, people want it, they want it direct, immediate, interactive, if you will. And so we've seen how, years ago we'd get our information from just a handful of sources. You had the local and world news at the, 6 o'clock and 6:30. You had the daily newspaper and you had the radio, so those kind of 4 mediums, if you will. That's how we information news was conveyed. And you didn't get much other than that, than by word of mouth. Well, now, how the internet and social media has changed all of that. And so, in social media companies, I think they have a great deal of influence of, again, what we see, how quickly, and I think it's dangerous when people get into echo chambers and they only get their news from one source. That's why as societies, as democracies, I think it's just so important. We value the free flow of information. We need to teach from the earliest ages not to rely on just one source of information, but be discriminating in how we and where we get our news from, and being able to synthesize getting information from multiple sources as opposed to just one source. Now, I'll say that geopolitically, we're seeing nations seeking to exert greater control or assert sovereignty, as they might say, over the national information environment in a way that runs counter to the open, interoperable, reliable, and secure internet that the U.S. favors and that the West would favor. At its most severe, that desire for control manifests in the highly restrictive information environments you see in China and Russia, North Korea. But it doesn't always have to look like that. Data localization is another less restrictive form of state control over an information environment. And I'll just end by saying that, a different form of influence over the information environment comes through the large market share of major tech companies, the consolidation of various different technology services such as cloud computing, social media, web search, or online commerce under one umbrella gives those companies significant power to shape the experiences of their users.
You sort of gave me the image of a sort of an accidental revolution. It's revolutionary, but there's nobody really pulling all the strings. It's just somehow coming down. I think that's quite a useful idea, actually. There's no single organization in control. And I wonder whether it actually makes much sense to think of cybersecurity, and I've got it in inverted commas, as a discrete area of policy. In the UK, we have digital in the title of one of our government departments. And that, to me, expresses this desire for the policy world to get on top of this emergent problem, to really get to grips with it, to understand it. But I just wonder whether you could argue that cyber touches upon, connects absolutely everything, all of your legislative interests, in a way, connect in one way or another to the world of cyber. So I wonder whether this whole thing is simply too big to expect a singular, coherent policy position.
Yeah, well, I agree that cybersecurity is too broad to expect a singular, coherent policy position. But I don't think that was ever the expectation in my view. For example, I think it's fair to say that Homeland Security is a discrete area of policy, but I don't think anyone really expects to have one singular, coherent policy position that will solve all of our Homeland Security problems. And cybersecurity should be thought of, I think, in the same way. It's a discrete area of policy, but it comprises a large number of interrelated policy problems for which there is no one-size-fits-all solution. One area where we could benefit from more convergence on cybersecurity is in Congress, where jurisdiction over the issue is split across dozens of different committees. Now, I've long thought a select committee on cyber would greatly streamline and benefit the legislative process in this area, much as how we had streamlined oversight of the intelligence community years ago with the creation of the Select Committee on Intelligence and the Select Committee in the House and the Senate. So I think that was a good example of how there's no one-size-fits-all. The oversight of the intelligence community is no one-size-fits-all when it comes to the policy area of cybersecurity.
Yeah, forgive me for having asked a rather abstract question, but it's probably a question that more or less reflects the pain that I endured having to edit a massive one-volume handbook on cybersecurity for Oxford University Press a couple of years ago, in which our mutual friend Mike Steinmetz was a contributor. Anyway, let's put that pain to one side. Not Mike, I mean the handbook. But can I then come back to this question of policy priorities? In among all of this, what would you say are the United States' top 2, 3, or 5 or whatever policy priorities in, let's call it cybersecurity, across the policy areas that you touched upon just now, whether it's homeland security or the military or whatever? Or is it possible even to prioritize?
Yeah, I think ultimately the priority needs to be about shaping incentives. On a diplomatic level, our countries need to be cooperating to move incentives for international behavior towards better cybersecurity outcomes. That means upholding norms, imposing costs on irresponsible state behavior, engaging in capacity building to help other nations defend their own systems. But shaping incentives also means accounting for areas in which the market fails to account for cybersecurity. We're still introducing new products that feature the same security flaws that we've been dealing with for decades. So incentivizing the development of more secure technology by design needs to be a priority. And, that's one example of actions governments need to take to move their ecosystems towards better cybersecurity. So, those efforts need to be paired with investments in our resilience so that we can recover from cyber attacks more quickly. And I think, pairing all of that activity together, what you're doing is denying an adversary the benefits that they might gain from launching a cyber attack, reducing their incentives to do so.
Given the deteriorated relations that we have with Russia, and given the, let's call it unease that we have in our relations with China, I wonder how much we can expect from the various global cyberspace governance efforts that we've got going, whether it's in the United Nations with a group of government experts and the open-ended working group, or other organizations like the OECD and so on, OSCE, I beg your pardon, and so on. Is this something that we should pause for a moment while we're dealing with other troubles with these two main countries?
No, I don't think we should pause. I think it's a very good question, obviously, and I think our efforts at the UN need to be geared though towards preserving and implementing the agreements made in the past about norms of responsible state behavior rather than developing new norms. I think it's going to be a challenge, as you pointed out, dealing with Russia and China. But, there have been agreements that have made before. Let's work on enforcing those and seeing those mature. Of course, even doing it, that will happen slowly. But, the main body responsible for cyber norms at the UN, the open-ended working group, requires the consensus of the entire UN body to achieve agreement. On the one hand, that's good because it lends a voice to countries that have not been part of previous norm-building processes at the UN, like the group of governmental experts. But on the other hand, it makes it much harder to achieve tangible progress, especially since, as you say, we're dealing with countries like China and Russia that promote a far different vision of the internet than the one that the U.S. and its allies aspire towards. So we've seen other efforts develop alongside the UN process, regional multilateral organizations like the Organizations for Security Cooperation in Europe, focused on implementation of UN norms in their regional contexts. And there's also separate multi-stakeholder processes that focus on issues like the application of responsible behavior in cyberspace to tech companies or to international law. But I think it will be important that these efforts remain linked and coordinated with the body of work of the UN and things that have already been achieved and the norms that it's created.
I've been following with great interest the Cyberspace Solarium Commission, which I know you served on, Jim. And I wonder if you could just say in a few words, perhaps, what the purpose of the commission was, what it achieved, and what it's still achieving.
Yeah, it was a wonderful effort to be a part of. One of the most meaningful experiences I've had during my time in Congress. It was bipartisan, nonpartisan. It was dedicated professionals that were there to fulfill the commission's charge, which was the Solarium Commission was created. It was established to develop a consensus on a strategic approach to defending the U.S. in cyberspace against cyber attacks of significant consequences. So I'm proud to say that I was a member of the commission, in large part because of how successful we were in not only developing that strategy, but also in implementing it. And we proposed a vision, for example, of layered cyber deterrence, implementing through 86 recommendations, more than half of which have now become law. As congressional commissions go, I have to say that's a Hall of Fame batting average. And some highlights I'll just touch on. It created the Office of the National Cyber Director. It greatly strengthened the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, or CISA, under Homeland Security as the nation's premier cybersecurity agency. It codified a bureau at the Department of State focused on cyber, led by Nate Fick right now. In fact, it was just codified into law, and it will be once the president signs the National Defense Authorization Act, which the House just passed yesterday. And it codified the Joint Cyber Planning Office at CISA, which has become what we know now as the JCDC. So a lot of wins that we wrapped up, made major changes in policy and structure. And I'll just end by saying this. I think with the Solarium Commission's work, for the first time that I've been doing cyber, we now have the right structure, policies, and people in place for stronger cybersecurity for the country. Doesn't mean it's not without its flaws or challenges, that we still need to see these things mature. But we're in a much better place now than when I first started in the area of cybersecurity.
My main area of interest has been national security, strategy, defense, and all that sort of stuff. And in those areas, a short list of emergent and disruptive technologies might include some of the following: artificial intelligence, human-machine teaming, big data, drone swarms, offensive and defensive cyber, hypersonic glide and maneuverable re-entry vehicles, quantum encryption and decryption, quantum PNT, precision navigation and timing, synthetic biotechnology, and directed energy weapons. And I could probably come up with a few more lines of the same sort of thing. So my first question is this. Does the breadth and the pace of innovation in all of these and other areas suggest anything significant about where innovation is or should be taking place now and in the future? Should it be a government-led activity, or should it be a private sector-led activity, or what sort of combination of the two? And is it actually realistic anymore to think of all of these things? I'm thinking in my mind going back to the 50s, really, in the US particularly, with the black projects, I think was the expression, and we've done similar in the UK and elsewhere among Western governments. Is this something now that we can be embarking upon nationally in any meaningful sense?
Yeah, it's just a light list of technologies there you've listed that upend the status quo in countless ways that we can't even begin to anticipate. But let me say this: I spent a lot of time thinking about this myself as chairman of the Cyber Innovative Technologies and Information Systems Subcommittee on the House Armed Services Committee, and it seems to me that the next few years are going to be decisive in the development and deployment of these technologies. Whoever is able to successfully do so first will have significant economic and military advantages over other nations. And it's for this reason that I've been a staunch supporter of robust government investment into these emerging technologies, but I also recognize that the government cannot do it alone. And also private sector cannot do it alone. I will say that private sector is leading in many of these areas, and it's up to those, I believe, in government to figure out how to support and then leverage that critical innovation. And you especially need the help in these small, innovative companies get across the valley of death, if you will, and help them to mature their technologies, get them into the hands of the warfighter when appropriate, but also develop them for economic advantage too. So, of course, innovation and investment is only half the battle. We also need to be able to effectively deliver the new innovative technologies that, again, we're developing for the warfighter, and that presents its own set of challenges. Breaking down those bureaucratic barriers to procurement must be a priority for the U.S. and its allies to ensure that we're able to turn the visions of what these technologies represent into reality.
My guess is whatever public-private mix we go for, we can all agree that society, your society, my society, our friends' societies across Europe and wherever else, we need more innovators. It's a perennial topic of concern and interest in the UK. And it's, of course, as you just said, it's not a security or strategic matter solely by any means. It's a question of establishing and maintaining economic dynamism, competitiveness, productivity, and so on. So what's your view, Jim? And I know you've done a lot of work in this area of training and education in technology and so on. What's your view on how best to generate science and technology capacity? And can you extrapolate from your knowledge of what's been achieved in the US and how the debate is at the moment to suggest ideas that might be of interest to the UK and other countries?
Any nation's greatest strengths is the incredible talent and resourcefulness of its people. Here in the United States, we are right now lacking things like quality facilities to support our best resources, our brilliant researchers. We've had to deal with crumbling infrastructure of our labs for quite some time. We face a massive backlog, in fact, in laboratory investment. More than $5.7 billion is the latest report to Congress on what we need to do to rehab and refurbish and build new infrastructure. This Congress, I will say, I'm pleased that we work to secure hundreds of millions of dollars in federal funding for our nation's laboratories to help fix this crumbling infrastructure. But the researchers, engineers, and the innovators who apply their talents to meeting the unique challenges of national security deserve a government that's willing to aid and able to support and bolster their efforts. So the United States and its allies need to continue honing programs that attract the right talent to the defense industrial base, while also preventing this talent from working for our adversaries' defense industrial bases and economies. So, for fostering talent across cultural and transnational idea sharing and cooperation and investment in our people is the best thing that we can do to harness the power and the promise of the future.
In his book, Human Compatible, Artificial Intelligence and the Problem of Control, the computer scientist, Professor Stuart Russell, who, by the way, is British, but currently at UC Berkeley, he argues, as his title suggests, that the fundamental problem with AI and the problem to which we really badly need a robust and enduring answer is that of control. Who or what is in charge? How do we ensure that AI, and I'd actually add to the list many of the other technologies that we've just touched upon, technological innovation more broadly, how can we ensure that all of this wave of innovation in AI and elsewhere, it serves us, it serves society, rather than serving either its creators or, most weirdly of all, itself?
Having a human in the loop on this is very important. Properly programming it with the right safeguards and parameters has to be a paramount concern. We don't want to wake up one day and this AI system becomes self-aware and sees us as a threat and then takes actions to protect itself. We don't want to create an AI system that's attached to a weapon system that they can't make human judgments when it involves a kill chain, for example, and there's a kinetic action that could be taken that could cause loss of human life. We can't ever get to a point where we're substituting human judgment for that of an AI system that may not feel or be programmed with our values of protection of human life in it. So it will be important. Artificial intelligence is still at best a long-term research project, but you're right that it's absolutely essential that we ensure AI works for the betterment of humankind first and foremost, and think carefully about the implications that artificial intelligence will have on society, on privacy, on national security, and again, human involvement in and governance over AI systems needs to be a crucial consideration in the design process, along with the transparency and explainability of a system. The AI systems intake and process information very differently than human brains do. Unexpected errors can happen. They can and will happen, and we need to be aware of that. But my view, it's unacceptable to deploy a system again in context where it can cause harm, where whether intentionally in a warfighting context or unintentionally in a civilian one, where there isn't a capacity to react to AI errors or to understand why those errors are happening. So, promising technology can make things better, but like with any technology, it has to be balanced with being aware of the consequences, unintended consequences that could be inflicted.
I agree completely, Jim. I think underpinning all of these technologies that we've been discussing are some very large and increasingly urgent ethical questions. And ethics are not a matter for machines. That's our job. Before I wind up and hand over to Mike Steinmetz, who's got some closing comments, I do have one final question for you, which is, as I said earlier, you're, I guess, a couple of months away from retirement from Congress. And the question is, what are you going to do?
Right now, still looking to explore what opportunities are out there in the private sector. But I will be a senior fellow at Brown University at the Watson Institute for next year, starting in January. I'm looking forward to doing a little bit of teaching, but mentoring students and holding office hours. But beyond that, do some things on some boards and commissions, and that space to do things that are still relevant and using the expertise I developed in cybersecurity over the years, and see how I can put those talents to use in other ways.
I don't detect a plan to slow down in any sense, but
even though I'm retiring from Congress, I'm not retiring per se. I'm just coming home.
We've covered a huge amount of ground, and I think that the highly informed and, if I may say, expert policy perspective that we hope for has been more than delivered. Congressman Jim Langevin, thank you so much for giving us all of your time today. It's made a great discussion. I've enjoyed it enormously, and I think a great podcast. Thanks also to your staff for making all of this possible, and best of luck for your not-so-retirement from Congress. And with that, I'll hand over to Mike Steinmetz.
Hi, Jim. What a very thought-provoking discussion so far. I jotted down a few things. If I can just touch the top of the waves at the federal level and probably ask you to address an area where I've seen you most, and that's at the local level. Paul brought up the topic of AI, and this is, I think, extremely important. You discussed ethics and decision making. You discussed a human in the loop. Can I ask if you have any concrete picture in mind developing of what the guardrails for that look like, considering the Army has just published their next strategy and vision, and they say we have to have decision superiority, not information superiority, not intelligence superiority. We need decision superiority, which infers timeliness, the assistance of algorithms and AIs, which infers some level of oversight and boundaries based on the ethics that Paul mentioned and you responded to. Can you give me some idea of what that looks like to you from the congressional level?
We want to make sure that our men and women in uniform, especially the leadership level where the decisions are going to be made in executing particular action, that they've got the best information possible. And where AI can bring great benefit is aggregating data from across multiple sources. The term now is JADC2, Joint All Domain Awareness and Control, and tying in all these various nodes of information that are going to be too numerous to count, but synthesizing down, aggregating down quickly, and then having options presented to a commander, say in the battlefield, about what the options are and what the best recommendation would be, but ultimately leaving that to the human in the loop to make the final decision.
Right. Having been on the warrior side and on the other side too, sometimes there's not congruence between the realm of the possible and the realm of the willing, of what you're willing to do or what you should do. Right. And I think that response really cuts to the heart of maybe we're diving into a new pool here a bit when we're going to the U.S. intelligence community and asking them to make a basis for decisions in some of these areas. We mentioned the great work that the Solarium Commission, and it reminds me of all the successes, of course, of that 1953 Solarium Commission and Eisenhower, but it also reminds me that there were some inconvenient things that happened in 1953. And maybe there's one or two inconvenient things in challenging areas that still need to be addressed here in the United States. Can you tell me, especially in the area of governance, we're aspirational. We probably had a record Senate confirmation for Chris Inglis in a highly bipartisan government. 100% of the senators gave him a thumbs up. Absolutely incredible that those kinds of things happen. But for governance at the national level, are there things that you want to see continue to evolve?
I am so pleased that Chris Inglis is our first national cyber director. He's a stellar choice, done a wonderful job getting that office up and running. I'm not sure how long we'll be able to hold on to him there, but he's been there about a year now, and he's done great work there. So, what I'd like to see kind of changed and improve is oversight at the congressional level, streamlining the legislative process, the oversight process of cyber. When right now we have some 80 different committees and subcommittees in the House that have some jurisdiction over cybersecurity. It's just too many to be able to move with the agility we need to move with when you're addressing cyber threats and cyber, the issues of cybersecurity and how we improve upon that. That's probably one of the biggest things that is still a recommendation of the Solarium Commission, of course, to create a select committee on cybersecurity in the House and the Senate. But obviously that would take a time, and unfortunately an event that would be maybe some catalyst event that would force the change that needs to happen.
That's a great observation, and I think having heard from good friends that were in both DHS and other areas talking about the time spent in front of oversight committees, that would be most welcome. I'd like to close with one question. Everywhere I go, regardless, if we're at the Cityforum event, we're talking about the human. And what I'd like to ask you is what we need to do yet with local challenges. I spent majority of my time with you in events where we were engaging your constituency and helping them understand what their role is in cybersecurity and how they can help their own digital security and their digital safety online. What are the biggest challenges with engaging with local citizens? How we bring these great ideas that happen at the international, at the national level, how do we synthesize that in a way that's understandable, that really helps citizens stay safer online and more secure online?
Yeah, Mike, I'm glad you raised that, and I was remiss in not, commending you for your work at the state cybersecurity advisor, and we did team up to do some important work educating the public about cybersecurity and practicing good cyber hygiene. We need to continue those types of efforts. I said one of the biggest kind of glaring pieces that we still are missing out on our strategy of keeping people and companies more cyber secure is a public awareness campaign. That's a constant reminder that almost like a Smokey the Bear campaign for cybersecurity, that only you can prevent cyber incidents, right? So if people practice good cyber hygiene, it takes care of a vast amount of the threats that we're focusing on out there. You need to be writing modern software, update your security patches, have strong passwords and multi-factor authentication. You're not clicking on the malicious links and downloading malware unintentionally. Those are the things that we need to continue to educate the public about. And it's not just a one and done. It's an ongoing effort that people need to be constantly reminded about the challenges that we face in cyber vulnerabilities, and that they can be part of the solution rather than being victims of or part of the problem.